So, prices seem to have finally gone to where they should go with Bloomborough. Things are starting to settle, and we can now start building decks with the prices we can expect for cards, which is good because I like being able to build decks, and I like being able to actually know what my stuff's gonna cost. And the minute that a set drops, things are always stupid expensive, and there's always that one card like Innkeeper's Talent that gets really annoying to try to purchase because people realize it's a doubling season and then the price starts increasing arbitrarily. I don't know. Cardboard shouldn't be expensive. That's why we build $15 decks over here, to make sure that you can afford whatever decks you want to play. That said, today's deck is going to be this little dude, Zoraline the Cosmos Caller. Our first time that we've been able to actually get a proper Bat commander. I know there have been other ones in the past, but let's be honest, this is the first time we've had one that actually works. So, let's get into how we are going to be doing this thing, and let's get into how we are going to be swarming the board with bats. Zoraline Cosmos Caller is a bat cleric with 3 power and 3 toughness, comes on the battlefield with a low cost of 3 mana, and whenever it or another bat attacks, you get to gain 1 life. And whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you get to revive any non-land permanent from your grave, as long as it's got mana value 2 or less, and you've got 2 mana and 2 life to spend on it. This commander is an absolute joy to play in paper, and I hope that you'll enjoy the $15 version of it, because what we are going to be building is effectively an aggro deck in Orzhov with lots of recursion, which is very different to what you normally see in these colors, but we are effectively building a white weenies style of deck where we want lots of bats on the board so we can get lots of triggers, and we are going to be using those triggers to do things. Now, there is a drawback to Zoraline, which is whenever it revives something, it gives it a finality counter, which says, you know, that the card will be exiled if we lose it, which is not what we want to happen with important pieces in our deck. So, in order to circumvent that problem, we are going to be finding ways to avoid that finality counter being an issue for us. And the first way we're going to avoid the finality counter is with Scholar of New Horizons. This guy allows us to get rid of any counter from any permanent we control and then search our library for a Plains card and drop it on the battlefield if somebody happens to have more lands than us. Or alternatively, it puts it in our hand if somebody does not have more lands than us. Honestly, this card is always going to be putting in work for us, allowing us to recur pieces in our deck more and more often than we normally would. Scholar of New Horizons does a lot of work for us, but it's not the only way we are going to be avoiding the finality counter problem. We also have one more card that avoids this, and that is Nesting Grounds, which normally I would talk about near the end of the video, but it's that important in this deck. In fact, actually, if you have the money to spot an Urza's Cave so that you can search up Nesting Grounds, it will be incredibly important for making this deck run smooth as butter. Nesting Grounds allows us to move a counter from any permanent to another target permanent at any point, as long as it's our turn. Now, what this means for us is that we can use Nesting Grounds to remove a finality counter from something that would otherwise get exiled on our board and throw it on our opponent's stuff, which will force them to be in a really awkward situation. Now, if we're fighting another reanimation style deck, their stuff is gone forever. If somebody is playing a deck with lots of flashback or, you know, anything like that, then the finality counter will stop all of that shenanigans. So please understand, Nesting Ground is one of the most important pieces for this deck. But we also want to be able to spawn plenty of bats, so we've got 3 ways of spawning bat tokens. Zoraline can reanimate things from our graveyard, so we have Desecrated Tomb right here. Desecrated Tomb says whenever one or more creatures leave our graveyard, we can make a black bat creature that has flying. These tokens will all be incredibly useful with Zoraline's ability, and they will be backed up by bat tokens spawned by Regal Bloodlord. At the beginning of every end step, if we gain life, create a 1/1 black bat token with flying. Note, this says every end step, not just our end step, so if we find ways to gain life on our opponent's turns, this will let us get more bat tokens on every turn cycle. Then we have the Singuin Evangelist. When it enters the battlefield or dies, we make a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying, and it's got Battle Cry, so whenever it swings, all of our creatures will gain 1/0. And since we are a go-wide aggro deck, This is incredibly helpful for making sure that we are able to win the game. We always want to be swinging and we always want to be doing chip damage, but chip damage isn't the only way we are going to be winning. Like, obviously, slamming bats into people's face is one way to win the game. However, gaining life from swinging with our bat tokens means that we can make use of this lovely little gain makes loss section. Every card here does something beneficial for us when we gain life, so let's look at each of these in kind. This is Sanguine Bond. Whenever we gain life, target opponent loses that much life. Defiant Bloodlord does the same thing while being a vampire. Both of these will allow us to turn all of the gained life from our bats into burn damage to whoever we want to kill. We also have Starscape Cleric, which has offspring, so we can get 2 of these out at any point, and whenever we gain life, each opponent will lose 1 life, along with Marauding Blight Priest, which does the same thing. This way, whenever we swing with, say, 5 bats, we will burn our opponents for a collective 15 damage if just 1 of these is on the board. Obviously more if more of these are out. And because these are lower in mana cost than the Sanguine Bond and the Defiant Bloodlord, these can be summoned with our commander's ability. And in fact, we can actually use our commander's ability first on the stack to get one of these on the battlefield and then gain the life from the bat triggers. This way, we will always be able to have a position of gaining and draining throughout the game. Then we have the Starseer Mentor. At the beginning of our end step, if we gained or lost life, target opponent loses 3 life unless they sack a non-land permanent or discard a card. Honestly, this guy's a little overcosted, but if you take a look at all of the bats available to us in Magic the Gathering, there's like 43 in Orzhov, so we are actually, literally, starved for choices right now. Then we have Bloodthirsty Aerialist. Whenever we gain life, we put a 1/1 counter on this. This is per trigger of life gain. Do understand that. So when the Bloodthirsty Aerialist is out, we swing with this and say 7 bats. 7 1/1 counters will be added to the Aerialist. Then we have Waxwane Witness. Whenever we gain or lose life, Waxwane Witness gets 1/0 until end of turn. Like with Bloodthirsty Aerialist, this will get multiple triggers of the life gain. So it can swing for 5, 10, 15, 20, depending on how many bats we have out and how many triggers we have going. Malakir Familiar has flying and death touch, which makes it a really wonderful blocker. And again, when we gain life, it gets 1/1 until end of turn. Perfect for our commander. Epicure of Blood says when we gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. It's just as good as the Star-Shaped Cleric and the Marauding Blight Priest, with the downside of it being a very expensive card to drop on the board. So please have some mana available for this dude. Then we have the Moonstone Harbinger. It's got flying and death touch, and if we gain or lose life during our turn, all bats we control will gain 1/0 and death touch until end of turn, but only once per turn. Now, I wish that we could get multiple triggers of this so that our whole board could get massive, but the only way to manage that would be by making multiple copies of Moonstone Harbinger, which is unfortunately not very easy to do in our given colors. But we need to talk about some more bats that we are going to be swinging with. These are just the bats that care about life loss and life gain. We have 8 other bats that are more generic, but still do lots of work for us. Duskhunter Bat has Bloodthirst. If an opponent was dealt damage this turn, it comes down with a 1/1 counter, so it's basically a 2-mana 2/2 bat. Sturge is a 1-mana 1/1 bat that allows us to pay 1 life and sacrifice it to draw a card, which can be important for some of the deck's other triggers later. Eye Twitch, whenever it dies, we learn, which is not going to be helpful in this format at all, but it is a 1-mana 1/1 bat. Then we have Grimclaw Bats, which lets us pay 1 life and give it 1/1 until end of turn. Note, there is no limit on how many times we can do this, so this card can actually just be a win con if somebody's health is low enough and we have plenty of black mana. Ruin Lurker Bat says at the beginning of our end step, if we have descended, we get to scry 1, and we descend anytime a permanent is put into our graveyard from anywhere. Most of the time, this will just be a 1-mana 1/1 bat with flying and lifelink, but oftentimes we will find ourselves in the scenario where that scry becomes important. Then we have Mechwood Bats, which says anytime we create or sacrifice a token, say all those bat tokens we're making with the other cards, then each opponent will lose 1 life, adding a little more burn to our deck's strategy. Then we have Cairn Wanderer, a changeling that gains most, if not all, of the keywords in our graveyard. It can get flying, double strike, death touch, haste, land walk, lifelink, protection, reach, trample, shroud, or Vigilance. Well, and Vigilance. You can grab all those. So 5 mana for a 4/4 bat that will almost always have flying and lifelink due to that being the most prevalent set of things in our grave, then this is actually not that bad, especially since that's going to be multiple life gain triggers when it steals lifelink from our bats in the graveyard. Then we have Mirror Entity, which can turn all creatures on our board into bats by just paying 0 into its ability. Until end of turn, creatures you control have base power and toughness XX and gain all creature types. So we pay 0 into this, and all creatures will become bats, but they'll have 0 power, 0 toughness. Pay 1 into it, they all become 1/1s. Pay 2 into it, they all become 2/2s. You know the drill with a card like this. The point of this is to either make all the bats really, really big, or just make sure that the things we have on our board that are not bats, like, say, I don't know, things like the Marauding Blight Priest, can be turned into bats so that they will gain the life gain trigger, so that the cards like the Marauding Blight Priest will cause everybody to die very, very quickly. But with all of the life gain making loss stuff, and with the bats we have trying to make us gain more life so that we can make people lose more life, we need some more ways of just generically gaining life. So we have Life Creed Duo, which is a bat bird that says whenever another creature enters the battlefield, we gain a life, as long as it's a card that we control. So Life Creed Duo is basically a mini Soul Sister while being a bat bird. Moonrise Cleric has its own version of whenever it attacks you gain 1 life, giving us extra triggers on top of our commander's triggers. Wisp Drinker Vampire says if any creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield, each opponent loses life when we gain a life, and we can also give all of our creatures lifelink and death touch with its secondary ability. Then we have Campaign of Vengeance. Whenever a creature you control attacks, defending player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This is another instance of our commander's ability, but it is dialed up even further because it has burn built into it. And then we have Basilica Screecher, which has Extort. Whenever we cast a spell, we can pay Orzhov, and if we do, each opponent will lose 1 life, and we will gain that much life, giving us 3 life gain and 1 life loss for everybody, triggering any of our Bloodthirst mechanics or anything like that, but also just giving us the life gain so that we can push forward into the game. We also need a way to win the game outright when people are being assholes, so we have Debt to the Deathless to make sure that everybody just kind of gets skewered really quickly by a giant spell if we desperately need to. Then we have Mirror Shield to give our commander hexproof in a pinch, and we need to have more recursion in our deck besides what our commander is doing. Our commander does plenty, but let's go ahead and back him up with 5 more recursion pieces. Beginning with Courier Bat, when it enters the battlefield, if we gained life this turn, return up to 1 creature from our graveyard to our hand. Very, very basic Grave Caller type card, but speaking of that, we have Grave Shifter or Grave Digger type cards. This is a changeling, so it is in fact a bat, and when it enters the battlefield, we can return any creature card from our graveyard to our hand. Then we have the trifecta of Sun Titan, Redemption Choir, and Savine's Reclamation to return any permanents with mana value 3 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield. These can grab lands, these can grab any type of creature, artifact, enchantment, whatever we happen to need. Whereas our commander is strictly limited to non-land cards, these can grab more and they benefit our commander a ton, especially when we start turning these into bats with the changeling ability that you've already saw earlier in the deck. That said, we do need to find ways to draw into all of these cards, so let's go ahead and talk about that. Now, our deck is very low to the ground, so it is going to be very, very important that we dig through it as fast as possible, because unlike a lot of other decks that can draw a big haymaker and win off of that, we don't have that. We've got to dig through all of our cards as fast as possible to have a chance of winning. So let's go ahead and look at the 10-card draw section, beginning with Ambition's Cost. We draw 3 cards and we lose 3 life when we cast this. Super, super simple. And then we have the Moonstone Eulogist. Whenever a creature an opponent dies, or a creature an opponent controls dies, we make a blood token, giving us access to looting. But in our deck, looting is as good as draw because our commander can bring those cards back. Same with Starlit Soothsayer, which gives us a Surveil at the beginning of our end step if we've gained or lost life this turn. Again, typically, I would not consider either of these really draw, but in our particular deck, because our commander is a full-on reanimation commander, this does actually function as pseudo draw for us. Then we have Star Strider at the beginning of our end step. If we gained or lost life this turn, look at the top 4 cards of our library, grab any creature card from it, and put it into our hand as long as it's got power 3 or less. That is a very easy thing to manage since most of the creatures in this deck are that small. Well of Lost Dreams says anytime we gain life, we can pay X mana, where X is the amount of life we gained, and draw that many cards. This can get through our deck very, very fast. Then we have Lunar Convocation at the beginning of our end step. If we gained life this turn, each opponent loses 1 life. And at the beginning of our end step, if we gained and lost life this turn, create a black creature token with flying, a black bat. And then we can pay 2 mana to pay 2 life, and then draw a card. Honestly, this card is great for not just this deck. I think any Orzhov Aristocrats deck is going to end up using this thing. This thing is fantastic. Then we have Dawn of Hope. Whenever we gain life, we can pay 2 mana to draw a card. We can also create a soldier with lifelink. We can use Greed as well to pay 2 life and draw a card. Welcoming Vampire allows us to draw a card every time we drop a creature with power 2 or less onto the battlefield. And Dark Star Augur has Offspring. Anytime we drop this on the board, we can clone it with Offspring. And at the beginning of our upkeep, we reveal the top card of our library, put it into our hand, and then lose life equal to its mana value. Yes, it's Bat Bob. That is exactly what this is. It's Bat Bob. So, we're drawing a lot of stuff. How are we going to be punishing our opponents for playing the game? Now, as per usual, we want to make sure that our removal spells are either covering a lot of bases or are very recurable. The thing about building a budget deck is you can't just use the best removal on the planet. You don't have access to it. So we do need to make sure that all of our removal is doing something more than just killing a single type of card. This is why you don't usually see me doing like Swords to Plowshares and Pongify and stuff. Also, they're too expensive for these kind of decks. Like, it's really weird that they're too expensive for these kind of decks, but let's go ahead and begin with our 10-card removal package with Generous Gift. Blow up any kind of permanent, and then give somebody an elephant that we're just going to fly over anyway. Legion to Ashes and get rid of any non-land permanent, and if we happen to be a token, all the tokens of the same name go away as well. It gets rid of all cloned things. Mortify can blow up a creature or an enchantment. Grasp of Fate gets rid of a card from each opponent's board as long as Grasp of Fate is on the battlefield, and importantly, Grasp of Fate is able to be reanimated with our commander. So when they get rid of this, we can just play it again. Vona, Butcher of Magan, allows us to pay 7 life to blow up any non-land permanent our opponents control once per turn, which is easy to do since we always have that life available. Accursed Marauder and Plaguecrafter are both serving the job of reanimatable thing that will be able to blow up a lot of things on our opponent's boards. Do note, though, if you bring these out, they will automatically die to their own finality counter after they sacrifice themselves. Like, they'll be gone forever. They'll be exiled. So what you have to do is, in response to the trigger of Plaguecrafter or Accursed Marauder, you need to use Scholar of New Horizons to get rid of that counter so that these will pop on the board, do their thing, and then kill themselves so that we can reanimate them again, but we will not be suffering from that finality counter. That's very important to avoid. Then we have Utter End, exile any non-land permanent, and Thraben Charm lets us blow up an enchantment or get rid of all players' graveyards, or deal damage equal to twice the number of creatures we have to any target creature. I'm going to be honest, the decks I've put this in lately, this thing has overperformed. This thing is fantastic. I love Thraben Charm. It's so good for a common. Then we have Feed the Swarm, blow up a creature or an enchantment, because we do need access to low-cost modal removal. And we are only running a single board wipe in this deck. We're low on interaction, low on board wipes, because we do have to stick very, very hard to our theme to make it work. So we are running a Starfall Invocation, which allows us to blow up all creatures, then gift a card to an opponent, giving them a draw, and then we get to reanimate any creature from our graveyard, as long as it was one that was thrown into the graveyard with Starfall Invocation. This is a very, very, very powerful card, basically a necromantic selection for 2 less mana. And if I had the space, I would run this with a necromantic selection on top of it. It is just that good. But that is all for removing our opponent's stuff. Let's talk about being able to afford all of these beautiful cards. We're running a bit of a smaller ramp section than normal because, quite honestly, we don't need a ton of ramp for a deck that is as low to the ground as this, but we do still need it for things like color fixing, and it is useful for getting out bigger cards like Sun Titan and Epicure of Blood. So we have a 9-card ramp section this time around, beginning with Charitable Levy, a wonderful new card from Modern Horizons 3. It stacks our opponents out for about 3 spell casts and then replaces itself by drawing a card and grabs a plains out of our deck, which we have plains that can be grabbed that are dual lands in our 99. Now, Charitable Levy has double use in our deck because we can cast it again with our commander, stacking people out a little more if we need, while also giving us access to a smidge more draw and a smidge more ramp. Ornithopter of Paradise is doing the same thing for us. Orzhov Signet's a 2-mana rock that can filter our mana. Marble Diamond and Charcoal Diamond are 1-mana or 2-mana mana rocks that come into play tapped, but honestly, it's worth it for getting them in at such a low price point. Wayfarer's Bauble can be sacrificed to get any basic land out of our deck onto the battlefield, and Mind Stone can be sacrificed to draw us a card later when we need to do that. Fractured Power Stone and Arcane Signet are our other 2-mana rocks that come into play untapped, 1 for colorless and 1 for color. Do note, though, if you need more ramp, you can recast Wayfarer's Bauble by using it from your graveyard with our commander. And we don't even care about the finality counter that much with this, as long as you just get to ramp a little bit more ahead. Honestly, it's a perfectly fine thing to just Wayfarer's Bauble into the commander, then use the commander to get the Wayfarer's Bauble, crack the Wayfarer's Bauble once more to keep yourself ahead on lands so that you can get to those important pieces in your deck sooner rather than later. But on top of all that, let's talk about the lands we are running. We've got some basics here, 11 plains and 9 swamps, with our dual lands being Command Tower, Orzhov Basilica, Tainted Field, and Shine Shadow Snarl, but these all come into play either untapped or serve some other function like the Orzhov Basilica. We are running a Sunlit Marsh and a Snowfield Sinkhole. Why? Well, because we have the Scholar of New Horizons, a card that allows us to go into our deck and grab a plains, any kind of plains, and drop it on the battlefield. So we use the Scholar, and we get one of these out. Then we have some fetching lands in the form of Shire Terrace, Terramorphic Expanse, Evolving Wilds, Promising Vein, and Escape Tunnel. Remember, the Shire Terrace and the Promising Vein come into play untapped and can be used for colorless mana, while the Escape Tunnel, Evolving Wilds, and Terramorphic Expanse are effectively tapped lands in our deck. We don't want to run too many of them, but deck shuffles are still incredibly useful, and animating these lands with things like Redemption Choir is another form of ramp. Myriad Landscape can be used to get 2 lands of any one color from our deck, which is basically more ramp. Then we have in our utility land section the aforementioned Nesting Grounds, then a Restless Fortress, a wonderful card that has a bit of utility for our deck. This is an Orzhov land that comes into play tapped, but we can animate it for 4, and whenever it attacks, defending player loses 2 life and we gain 2 life. In a pinch, this can be a burn and game-winning trigger, depending on what people's lives are at. It also allows us to have more access to life gain triggers even after a board wipe. Honestly, man lands are underrated in Commander. Mudflat Village can be used to make sure that we have access to our bats after they die. And then, of course, Pit of Offerings, giving us access to removing everybody's cards from graveyards. Well, 3 cards from any graveyards, but just get rid of the problematic ones that you need to get rid of. And then it is Omni Mana after that. It taps for whatever colors of the things you have thrown away. That said, with all of these cards talked about, what would you do if you had a little more money to invest in the deck? Well, let's go budgetless and find out. If you are upgrading this deck, there's a few considerations I would do. One is fleshing out the removal section a bit more, fleshing out the draw section a bit more, and then having one of the bats that we simply do not have access to. Well, 2 of them we don't have access to due to our budget. So let's begin with Anguish Unmaking, exiles any non-land permanent, and we lose 2 life. It is one of the best removal spells in Commander, and if you do not have it in your deck, you probably should put it in. Ripples of Undeath gives us access to a pseudo draw by milling us 3 cards every time we go to our pre-combat main phase. These are reanimatable with our commander, of course, but we can also pay 1 mana and 3 life to just put one of them into our hand. Decassia's Welcome allows us to draw a card anytime a creature with mana value 3 or less touches the battlefield on anybody's turn. and only once per turn, but that's fine because we have bat tokens for that. Mechwood Nexus can make a bat token, but it also turns all of our non-bats into bats, meaning that they will work way better with our commander. Bolus's Citadel is almost a win con in most decks that it's in, and it lets us pay life to cast things off the top of our deck. Power Conduit's another way to get rid of counters from our permanents so that we do not suffer from the finality counter problem. Vanquisher's Banner is probably one of the most boring cards you could ever put in a tribal deck ever, but here we are. Veto is another win con with our deck, as it is another copy of Sanguine Bond. Skull Clamp is really powerful draw that we just don't have access to in our budget. Aklazot's Deepest Betrayal is probably the strongest bat in Magic the Gathering, and it's very, very easy to play. Whenever an opponent discards a land card, we make a bat token with flying. Whenever it attacks, we make everybody discard a card. If they can't discard a card, we draw a card. And whenever this dies, it just flips into a land that we can then reanimate afterwards. Honestly, the card is fantastic. Kindred Dominance is very powerful asymmetrical board wipe, though the mana's a bit steep for what we're trying to go for, but it is still very great and super on flavor. Then we have Black Market Connections that allows us to make treasure tokens and draw cards and make shapeshifter bat tokens every single turn for mana, or life really, that we're always going to be gaining. Roaming Throne is, again, one of the most boring cards you could put in any tribal deck, but it does double up our bat triggers. Three Tree City is the new love child for every single person who is playing a commander deck with typal tribal kindred shit in it, and Alhamret's Archive allows us to double up on all of our draw and life gain numbers. Not our triggers, though. I would prefer the triggers, but it does just double up on the raw numbers, which is still important when you consider that cards like Veto, Thorn of the Duskrose will benefit from them. So, with that all said, where are we at with this deck? In conclusion, Zoraline is an absolutely batty commander, and honestly, it feels nice just having something like this that is not super overpowered or has this gigantic win con attached to it. He's just a nice, classically styled commander. Like, there's two types of old style commanders that we just don't get anymore, and that's ones that just have very, very basic abilities that don't do a whole lot, but if you build the deck around them, they can do some interesting things. And then the types of commanders that win the games very easily on their own, but they have massive drawbacks that you have to build around. Zoraline is both a lower power commander who has a drawback that we have to factor in to our 99. That's why we have to have counter removal in the 99 of our deck. And I love that he does that. I like having these downsides that prevent us from just going forward with a brain-dead strategy, even if aggro turn bat sideways is a fairly brain-dead strategy. But I do want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already, subscribe if you haven't already, and honestly, just let me know what upgrades you would do to this deck. I've been enjoying this deck in paper a lot, so maybe I'll do a full power version of this later. Who knows? We'll see. Bloomburrow's been a bit of a treat for me. But that all said, thank you all for watching. Share this video with a few friends if you haven't already. Maybe they like Budget Commander, and my channel can be a nice place for them to go. I know there's other budget-minded channels on the internet, but hey, I'd like to be the best one out there if possible. Maybe. It's probably not going to happen, but, you know, I'll try. That said, as always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Mark Anthony, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fire Shard. and everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.